Is the Southern Baptist Church or the biblical doctrine of complementarianism or purity culture somehow responsible for the murders perpetrated by Robert Long in Atlanta? Of course not. That this question has to be asked. That a case needs to be made to push back against the idea is shocking to me. It is perhaps foolish of me for it to be shocking, because it has long been the habit of people on both sides of the aisle to applying the principle that you never let a great hardship go to waste. That we use these kinds of news events and tragedies to pin blame on our ideological enemies, which is precisely what has happened here. As there have been those who tried to put the blame on the biblical idea that husbands are to be the heads of their families, that sexual propriety is an appropriate thing, that modesty is a good thing, that this is somehow objectifying women, which in turn leads to whatever this nutty behavior by Long. And I mean, it's just amazing to me to consider the fact that here's Robert Long, who after his arrest describes himself and has been treated for sexual addiction. And his motive, of course, has nothing to do with racism, but his motive is to remove temptation. Now, the first thing I thought, like anybody else familiar with the Bible probably would have thought, was the warning that Jesus gives that if your hand offends you, cut it off. If your eye offends you, take it out. It's a gross distortion of the teaching of Jesus to, instead of, when you're facing temptation, instead of taking responsibility for yourself, you decide to take it out on the thing that you're tempted by. But that's what we do. In fact, it's precisely what, in an ironic twist, it's precisely what those who are trying to make this case against their ideological foes are doing. That is, they're saying, they accuse people who believe that husbands are to be the heads of their homes of taking the position that men are hopelessly lustful beings that can't control themselves, and that it's women's fault when they, tempt them, though no one holds that view, and turning around and saying no one can be held responsible for shooting people because it's the fault of the people who taught him. He's a member in good standing at a Southern Baptist church. He's a self-professed evangelical Christian. And so let's just blame them. Friends, here's a simple principle I want us all to embrace. We are responsible for what we do. You can make a case that, people under a certain age or people who are schizophrenic or something are not responsible for what they do. But any sane adult is responsible for what he or she does. And no ideology can be blamed for it unless that ideology clearly and unambiguously, as in the case of Islam and terrorism, clearly and unambiguously teaches that you ought to do this. Robert Long's church didn't say go shoot people who work in spas. Nobody in the Southern Baptist Convention ever taught that. So let's stop this ridiculous pattern and habit and have this sensitivity to the victims to hold the victimizer responsible for what he did.